Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining me at the art table again today. We're back to more normal topics on this channel. If you've just joined me since my last video, welcome. This is really more along the lines of what I usually do as compared to my previous video, but I do want to talk a little bit about a topic that is inspired by similar subject matter, and that is how we go about creating art and culture. Right now, there are basically two minds about art and culture. The first is that art is a purely individual expression of something within themselves. Thus, art can be created without any reference to anything around you. Alternatively, art is a thing that is decided on by the market. Art is supposed to be thrown into a marketplace to compete with a whole bunch of other art, and the people will choose whatever the best art is. I don't think either of these ideas are correct. The first viewpoint, that art is entirely a thing created as individual expression, flies in the face of my understanding of storytelling, and storytelling is the art that I am most concerned with here. Yes, I do talk about the visual arts because I love to draw and I love visual storytelling, but these things still loop back to my interest in storytelling, so that is the primary lens that I really apply when I'm thinking about this subject. Storytelling is a group activity. As I said before when I asked the question, what is a story? I believe you haven't really taken the measure of a story until you know how well that story can be repeated by the people who have heard it. I speak about the story circle because I believe the relationship between storyteller and audience is vitally important, and I don't believe any one person should be either audience or storyteller at all times. I believe this is a role that should change over time, and people should be both storytellers and audience. The unnatural dichotomy that we have in a lot of our culture, where people either create art or consume it, strikes me as a very unnatural and very unhealthy attitude to have towards art and culture. I think it's partly a result of having such long-term mediums to hold our art in the modern day. All the best stories and music and visual arts are already preserved digitally, and people can just go back and experience them whenever they want. In the past, if you wanted to hear music, most of the time you had to make it yourself, and this got people involved in this aspect of creating culture and kept their minds on what made art good and vital and important. You didn't always get the best art, but you did get to be involved in art, and that, I think, is a vital part of what transforms art from individual expression into a shared culture. The flip side of this is art as a product for market, and I think this idea has been just as bad for art and culture as art as individual expression. This is an idea I have really been thinking about ever since I started reading Makoto Fujimura's book Art and Faith. In this book, one of the ideas Fujimura discusses, he introduces through the lens of John chapter 11, verse 35, which of course is the shortest verse in most translations of the Bible, which says that Jesus wept. This seems like a very strange verse to draw a lot of insight from, but Fujimura's point is very, very interesting. He notes that Jesus is weeping in grief over the death of a man who he intends to raise from the dead. And not at the final judgment day, but in a few minutes. Why does Jesus stop to do this if he's about to bring Lazarus back to life? The conclusion that Fujimura reaches, and the one I think is very important to this discussion, is that Jesus stops to weep because it is human to grieve for those who have died. What is important in this verse is not the most efficient use of time. What is important is not the theological implications of resurrection. What is important is that grief at death is inseparable from the human condition, and Jesus, as fully God and fully man, must express the human condition. It is right and good that he did so. And there is a lesson in that for the artist, because the artist must express the human condition first and foremost, in order to make art, in order to build up culture. The problem, then, with submitting art to the market is that the market is not human. It will not choose art in a human way. Yes, the market is made up of people, but the market is primarily driven by monetary material value, and human nature goes beyond the monetary and the material. If we allow our art and culture to be driven entirely by monetary and material sources, then our culture will ultimately become purely monetary and purely material. A situation I'm sad to say we currently occupy and is very unhealthy for us. So, as I have been sitting here contemplating media contracts and incentives and a wide variety of other things, I have been asking myself, is this really the paradigm that we want art to come out of? It's a very difficult question to answer because the market is always going to be an influence on art, just as art will always be an influence on the market. These two things are very foundational human things that are a part of every human culture. And in spite of how philosophers or sociologists or theologians try and chop things up and divide them into little pieces, culture is ultimately a holistic thing. So art and the market will, to a certain extent, be in dialogue. But to make art entirely subordinate to the market strikes me as a very dangerous step. The self-portrait that we are currently seeing here was painted by Rembrandt Harmensons van Rijn shortly after his bankruptcy and his being forced to sell off most of his collection of art, his printing press, and a number of other very valuable things. It's very interesting in light of that fact. He is well dressed. He is dressed, in fact, in gold. He has a gold-topped cane and a fur cape. What is Rembrandt trying to say about himself here? Is he reflecting on a lifetime of artistic triumphs and saying, this bankruptcy does not undo all the accolades I have rightly won? Is he defying the circumstances that have financially brought him low? Is he proclaiming that he was wealthy once and will be again? Or is he simply painting a farewell to circumstances that may never return to him again? We don't know. But the power of this artistic work is that it came out of these very, very inauspicious circumstances and still speaks to us on a personal and a cultural level. The market is not built on these kinds of decisions. In fact, the nature and desires of the market are outright contrary to these kinds of decisions. And yet, it is these decisions that cut contrary to immediacy and self-interest and speak instead to the weaknesses, the inefficiencies, the short-sightedness, the stubbornness, and the recklessness of humanity that the market will filter out of art if we are not careful. It is fine to be both artist and businessman. But if you look at your art entirely through the lens of the businessman, then sooner or later, it will distort your understanding of art, and you will no longer be making culture. It's not an easy point of balance to find, but I think it's one that we really need to focus on in the modern consumer-driven culture we live in. Or maybe somebody's already found the perfect balance point. If you know of him, let me know about it in the comments below. There's a like button and a subscribe button down there. You can use those as you see fit, and I'll talk to you later.